Andrew Smith was never the type of man you'd expect to abandon his wife, especially not on the very day she was giving birth to his child. He had always been the charming, dependable one, the man every neighbor in Glendale admired. But hidden beneath the surface was a secret that would upend more than one life. While Jessica labored alone in a sterile hospital room, Andrew was elsewhere, exchanging vows with his mistress. In that moment, he believed he was chasing true happiness. Little did he know that 3 years later, regret would strike harder than he could have ever imagined. Andrew Smith grew up in a tight-knit family on the outskirts of Glendale, California. His parents, Richard and Monique Smith, were known in their neighborhood for their unwavering devotion to one another. They had weathered life's storms, financial troubles, his mother's illness, and the struggles of raising 3 children without ever letting their bond break. Andrew was the middle child, neither the high-achieving eldest like his brother Marcus, nor the gentle artistic youngest like his sister Abigail. But if anyone were to ask, Andrew was the most driven. He had big dreams of becoming an entrepreneur, owning a chain of successful coffee shops, and perhaps settling into a comfortable life surrounded by friends and family. He met Jessica Perez while attending Glendale Community College. Jessica was studying early childhood education, determined to become a teacher. She was the kind of woman who cared deeply, not just for children, but for every person she encountered. Her warmth attracted Andrew from the start, and within weeks they had become inseparable. Jessica's friends teased that she was drawn to Andrew's ambition and quick wit, while Andrew's siblings noted how Jessica's calm demeanor tempered his restless spirit. 2 years into their relationship, they got married in a small ceremony at Jessica's grandparents' ranch in Santa Clarita. Their union was the picture of young love, pure optimistic, and buoyed by big plans for the future. Andrew had just opened his first coffee shop, Glendale Grounds, a modest storefront, but bustling with potential. Jessica found a job at a local preschool, shaping young minds by day and supporting Andrew's dreams at night. For the first few years, they were blissfully unaware of the cracks forming beneath the surface. Andrew's relentless drive led him to expand Glendale Grounds. Soon he had 2, then 3 locations. He was often away working long hours, traveling to find new coffee suppliers or attending seminars. Jessica's teaching schedule was also rigorous, but she always made time for date nights and quiet moments, trying to keep the flame alive. Yet with each new coffee shop, Andrew drifted further. He started missing dinner more frequently. Jessica felt his absence acutely, but she never truly believed it could be anything more than the stress of a growing business. Little did either of them know a single chance meeting in his flagship store would begin to unravel their once happy union. Cynthia Mills was a freelance marketing consultant and an undeniable force of nature. She had moved to Glendale just months prior, attracted by the city's blossoming business scene. Cynthia was known for her polished presentations, cunning strategies, and a confidence that was utterly magnetic. If Cynthia wanted something, she typically found a way to get it. The day Andrew and Cynthia met was unremarkable at first glance. Cynthia strolled into Glendale Grounds' flagship location with a laptop under her arm. She ordered a double espresso and settled into a corner table, preparing to work on a proposal for another client. Andrew happened to be there going through paperwork, observing baristas, and chatting with regulars. Cynthia was exactly the type of clientele he'd hoped to attract, business-minded, sophisticated, and obviously discerning in her taste. She caught his eye, not merely because she was strikingly beautiful, though she was, but because she exuded the kind of sharp energy Andrew believed could propel his business to greater heights. He introduced himself, offered to refill her espresso on the house, and struck up a conversation. Before he knew it, they were discussing potential brand partnerships, ways to streamline social media campaigns, and expansions into other neighborhoods. Cynthia's proposals were fresh and innovative, precisely what Andrew needed to stay ahead of the competition. Impressed by her ideas, Andrew set up a formal meeting the following week to discuss a possible collaboration. One meeting turned into several. Cynthia spent long hours at the cafe, often working alongside Andrew in the back office. She noticed his every gesture, the way he fiddled with his pen when concentrating, the soft smile he wore when discussing his passion for coffee, the charismatic flair he brought to every interaction. Gradually, her professional admiration shifted into something more personal, and Andrew, who had long been starved for excitement outside of routine business tasks, found himself drawn to Cynthia's brilliance and boldness. Jessica was vaguely aware of a new consultant in Andrew's life. He mentioned her sporadically. Cynthia had a great idea today, or Cynthia thinks we should rebrand the logo. Jessica, trusting and supportive, never suspected anything. She remained confident in her husband's loyalty and saw Cynthia purely as a boon to Andrew's business. But with each late-night strategy session and business trip, the lines between professional collaboration and personal intrigue blurred. Andrew was at the precipice, unaware that one misstep could send him careening into an affair that would shatter the world he and Jessica had built. Things took a sharp turn on a trip to San Francisco, where Andrew and Cynthia attended a coffee and marketing convention. Jessica couldn't accompany him. Her teaching responsibilities were demanding, and she was in the early stages of pregnancy. Delighted by the news of becoming a father, Andrew was initially conflicted about traveling at such a crucial time, but Jessica encouraged him to go and grow his business. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime event," she said, stroking her belly. "You have to do what you can to make Glendale Grounds a success." In San Francisco, Andrew and Cynthia's professional rapport escalated into something undeniably personal. After a long day of presentations and networking, they found themselves at the hotel bar savoring a glass of wine. Talk of marketing and coffee beans gave way to deeper conversations about fears, ambitions, and regrets. Cynthia confided that she'd been in a string of unfulfilling relationships and was tired of men who lacked vision. Andrew admitted he often felt lonely, despite being surrounded by employees and customers. He talked about Jessica's pregnancy with pride, but also confessed to feeling anxious about the looming responsibilities. One glass of wine led to another, and the tension between them crackled like static in the air. When Andrew escorted Cynthia back to her hotel room, he lingered at the door a moment too long. That was all the invitation Cynthia needed. A fleeting moment of weakness culminated in a passionate night that neither could deny nor undo. The following morning, Andrew was overcome by guilt and panic. Cynthia attempted to reassure him that they could keep their affair discreet. But Andrew found himself trapped between two worlds, the loyal husband about to become a father, and the ambitious entrepreneur enthralled by a woman who sparked excitement in his otherwise predictable routine. He convinced himself that this was a one-time lapse in judgment, a mistake he would bury deep. When he returned to Glendale, Andrew promised himself to break things off with Cynthia and refocus on Jessica and the upcoming baby. Yet, as any forbidden romance tends to do, the allure only grew stronger. Back home, Cynthia continued working closely with Andrew, and the emotional tie they had forged wouldn't simply disappear. Jessica, meanwhile, began experiencing complications in her pregnancy, further occupying her mind and time. Andrew found himself torn in two, helplessly wanting to be a devoted husband, but too addicted to the fire of his illicit connection with Cynthia. Jessica's pregnancy was marked by both excitement and worry. At her 20-week ultrasound, the doctor detected some minor complications. Though not life-threatening, she was advised to reduce stress rest often and attend frequent checkups. Jessica did her best to follow these instructions, though it meant cutting back on her teaching responsibilities. Her colleagues at the preschool were understanding, sending her well wishes and covering her classes. Andrew appeared supportive, at first driving her to the hospital for appointments, making sure she took her vitamins, and promising to make time for her, despite his hectic schedule. But unbeknownst to Jessica, Andrew's emotional investment had veered dangerously off course. He was juggling phone calls from Cynthia, who pitched new ideas and invited him to after-hours networking events. On the outside, Andrew maintained a facade, a husband still engaged in his wife's well-being, a businessman forging ahead. On the inside, he was spiraling. Late one night, Jessica noticed Andrew texting surreptitiously. She confronted him, albeit gently worried that he might be overworking. He brushed it off, claiming that a supplier had changed terms at the last minute, forcing him into crisis mode. Jessica chose to believe him. After all, Andrew had never before given her a reason to doubt him. She wanted to cling to the image of the devoted man she married. However, Jessica wasn't entirely oblivious. She sensed Andrew's distance, the way he seemed perpetually lost in thought. She tried to bridge the gap by planning a romantic dinner at home, decorating the living room with fairy lights, and cooking his favorite meal, creamy mushroom pasta. Andrew appreciated the gesture, but the intimacy felt strained. Where once they would have fallen into comfortable conversation, now silences hung heavy. Jessica chalked it up to business stress and her own pregnancy-related mood swings, hoping time would realign them. Cynthia, for her part, was not inclined to stay in the shadows. Initially, she told Andrew she was content with secrecy, but as her feelings deepened, so did her aspirations. She wanted Andrew fully not in stolen moments. She started leaving voice messages, hinting at a life they could share. She began dropping by Glendale grounds, unannounced, claiming business emergencies. Slowly she planted herself in Andrew's world, making it impossible for him to avoid her or hide her presence from prying eyes. With each day, the weight of Andrew's deception grew heavier, even as Jessica's due date grew closer. The delicate balance he thought he could maintain was teetering dangerously, one misstep away from collapsing and crushing everything in its path. As Jessica entered her final trimester, her health became increasingly fragile. Doctors' visits became weekly routines. She was ordered to spend more time on bed rest, limiting her mobility. During this period, Andrew tried to be more present, yet every moment of solace Jessica found in Andrew's support was counterbalanced by the haunting sense that his mind was elsewhere. In the midst of this tension, Glendale Grounds was about to open its fourth branch, a massive milestone for Andrew's business. Local media, including the Glendale Register, planned to cover the grand opening, raising the cafe's profile in the community. Jessica wanted to celebrate Andrew's success. She urged him to invite friends, family, and staff to a soft launch party. Despite her limited mobility, she coordinated with Andrew's sister Abigail to decorate the new location. She even crafted handwritten invitations for the staff, praising their hard work. Cynthia was of course involved in every aspect of the marketing campaign for the new branch. Jessica and Cynthia finally met briefly at the soft launch. Cynthia appeared graceful, poised, and every bit the professional marketing consultant. Jessica thanked her for all the contributions she'd made to Andrew's venture. Cynthia smiled politely, exchanging pleasantries, but internally seethed with envy at Jessica's rightful place beside Andrew. Meanwhile, Andrew, feeling trapped between the two women, found it difficult to hide his anxiety. Complicating matters further, Andrew's parents, Richard and Monique, stopped by the new cafe. Richard pulled Andrew aside, noticing his son's strained expression. "You all right, son?" he asked, genuine concern in his eyes. Andrew forced a smile, insisting everything was fine. Monique fussed over Jessica, offering to help with the pregnancy in any way she could. Andrew felt pangs of shame. He remembered how his parents had stood by each other, through thick and thin, their unwavering devotion, a beacon for him growing up. Here he was, their son, betraying that same devotion with each secret text message and clandestine encounter. The soft launch, while a public success, only amplified Andrew's private turmoil. Cynthia cornered him after the event, pressing him about their future. Jessica, though physically weary, radiated pride in her husband's achievement. Andrew once believed that forging a double life might give him the best of both worlds. Unfortunately, it had only opened a chasm in his soul. The pressure was mounting. Jessica was due any day now, and Andrew felt caught in a riptide of deceit. He failed to realize just how viciously it would tear him from the shore when the time came. Jessica's labor came earlier than expected, 3 weeks before her due date. She had been reclining on the sofa reading a parenting magazine when a sharp pain seized her. Alarmed, she called Andrew, who was at the new cafe with Cynthia, for a staff meeting. He answered, but was distracted, telling Jessica he'd be there soon. Cynthia overheard the conversation, her eyebrows arching, as she realized Jessica was in labor. Jessica's contractions intensified rapidly. She called her sister-in-law Abigail, who rushed over to help her to the hospital. The on-call physician, Dr. Clara Alvarez, examined Jessica and confirmed the baby was on its way, though she also warned that Jessica's blood pressure was dangerously high. Jessica was in tears, partly from the pain, but mostly from the fear that Andrew hadn't arrived yet. Abigail tried to calm her, promising that Andrew would be there any minute. Across town, Andrew felt the intensity of Cynthia's gaze. She watched him with an almost predatory interest as he hung up the phone. Instead of rushing to Jessica, he hesitated, caught in a bizarre swirl of emotions. Cynthia seized the moment to convince him that maybe their love was meant to be that Jessica's pregnancy had never truly kept him by her side. Andrew was vulnerable, exhausted by the months of lies, and he found himself listening to Cynthia's every word. What Andrew did next was unimaginable. Instead of driving to the hospital, he accompanied Cynthia to a courthouse in Van Nuys. Cynthia had orchestrated it perfectly, claiming they needed to make their relationship official if Andrew truly wanted to break free from the charade of his failing marriage. It was a reckless act spurred by emotions and illusions. Andrew, guilt-ridden, yet seduced by the idea of a fresh start, succumbed to Cynthia's plan. In a haze, he signed the necessary paperwork, exchanging vows in a rushed civil ceremony, while Jessica was enduring labor pains. At Glendale Memorial Hospital, Jessica was wheeled into the delivery room. Her blood pressure continued to climb, and the baby's heart rate spiked, alarming the medical team. Monique and Richard arrived, desperately calling Andrew's phone, but he never picked up. Jessica sobbed, asking for her husband, longing for him to hold her hand. Abigail insisted that Andrew must be stuck in traffic or dealing with an emergency. Behind the curtains, Dr. Alvarez prepared for a possible C-section if Jessica's condition worsened. Outside, a thunderstorm gathered over Glendale, mirroring the tumult within Jessica's heart. Jessica gave birth to a daughter, Amelia Rose Smith, at 2:45 a.m. The medical team managed to stabilize Jessica's blood pressure, and after a tense few hours, both mother and baby were safe. Yet the momentous joy of welcoming Amelia into the world was marred by Andrew's absence. He was nowhere to be found, and no one had heard from him since earlier that day. While Jessica clung to her newborn, tears slid down her cheeks. The only reassurance she had was Abigail's gentle voice telling her that everything would be all right. Deep down, Jessica felt a sinking dread. Was Andrew hurt, or had he chosen to abandon her at her most vulnerable hour? In reality, Andrew was in a small, nondescript hotel room with Cynthia. The gravity of his decision weighed on him like an anvil, each heartbeat reminding him of the irreversible vow he'd just made. Cynthia, on the other hand, celebrated triumph. She interpreted Andrew's impulsive compliance as proof of his undying affection, ignoring the guilt plainly etched on his face. Morning dawned, and Andrew's phone buzzed incessantly with missed calls and frantic voicemails. When he finally listened, the words "emergency hospital" and "birth" hammered at his heart. Unsteady and nauseous, he told Cynthia he had to see Jessica to make sure she and the baby were all right. Cynthia tried to stall him, insisting that seeing Jessica now would compromise their newly minted marriage certificate. But Andrew couldn't ignore the fact that a tiny human, his daughter, had come into the world without him. By the time Andrew arrived at Glendale Memorial, Jessica was awake and painfully aware of his betrayal. Rumors had spread. Staff whispered about a tearful father missing in action. Jessica's sister, Abigail, confronted Andrew in the hallway, practically hissing, "Where were you?" Jessica nearly lost her life. Andrew mumbled an excuse about legal complications at the cafe, but Abigail wasn't buying it. Even Andrew's parents looked on him with disbelief and disappointment. Andrew entered Jessica's room cautiously. She lay there pale and exhausted, holding Amelia protectively against her chest. Jessica looked up at him, tears in her eyes, and asked why Andrew had no coherent answer. He simply stood there, overwhelmed by regret, by the tiny bundle in Jessica's arms, by the knowledge that he had just done something that might rip apart everything he once held dear. In that moment, a single thought crystallized in Andrew's mind: the life he had chosen would not be easy to live with. The hospital room was dimly lit, cast in soft yellow light, the scent of antiseptic still lingering in the air. Jessica lay in bed, pale and exhausted, her newborn daughter swaddled gently in her arms. Amelia's tiny chest rose and fell against her mother's heartbeat, oblivious to the chaos that had unfolded outside the womb. Jessica's arms trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from emotional overload. Her lips were chapped, her cheeks tear-streaked. The nurses moved quietly around her, avoiding questions they had no answers to. There was only one question that mattered to Jessica, now the one that clung to every breath. Where was Andrew? He hadn't come. He hadn't even called. And despite her attempts to convince herself that something must have happened, an accident, a family emergency, anything, a cold and terrifying truth began to settle in her bones. He had chosen not to be there. 3 days later, Jessica was discharged, but she didn't go home. Instead, Richard and Monique Andrews' parents insisted she come stay with them. "You shouldn't be alone right now," Monique had said, placing a warm hand on Jessica's shoulder. "Not with a newborn. Not after this." Jessica had nodded, silently grateful, and broken in equal measure. Their house, once filled with laughter, from Sunday brunches and baby name debates, was now wrapped in an awkward, suffocating quiet. Jessica did her best to keep to herself, tending to Amelia's every need with near-obsessive precision, feeding, changing, rocking her to sleep, repeating the cycle. She found solace in the rhythm of motherhood, even if her own heart was in pieces. Each time Amelia looked up at her with wide, curious eyes, Jessica whispered, "You are enough. We are enough." Andrew didn't show his face until nearly a week later. He arrived at the front door of his parents' home, disheveled and gaunt, holding a small bouquet of tulips and an oversized teddy bear. Monique opened the door and said nothing. She simply stepped aside, allowing her son to walk into the lion's den of his own making. Jessica was in the living room, nursing Amelia under a soft blanket. When she saw him, her entire body stiffened. He stood there frozen. "I'm sorry," he said. Jessica didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on Amelia, her jaw clenched so tightly it ached. I know I should have been there. Everything got out of control. Her voice came out like a whisper, sharp and laced with pain. You weren't just not there, Andrew. You were with her. You married her. The silence that followed felt heavier than grief. I didn't plan it, Andrew muttered. It was a mistake. I didn't know what I was doing. Jessica's head snapped up. Her voice rose for the first time in days. You made vows, Andrew. Vows to me. To us. And then you made more vows while I was screaming in a hospital bed, giving birth to your daughter, alone. Andrew's lip trembled. I didn't think no, she snapped. You didn't. You never thought about me. Or her. She stood still, holding Amelia close, and moved past him. The bouquet dropped from Andrew's hand, hitting the floor like a symbol of something wilted long before it ever bloomed. That night, Andrew stayed outside in his car for hours. Inside, Monique and Richard sat in the kitchen staring into mugs of untouched tea. Richard finally spoke. He's our son. But what he did, it's unforgivable. Monique sighed. And yet that's our granddaughter in there, and she deserves better than silence and shame. Days passed, then weeks. Andrew began visiting more often, not as a partner, but as a fractured man grasping at fatherhood. He held Amelia cautiously, as though afraid she'd sense the weight of his sins. Jessica never left the room. She watched him like a hawk, not out of jealousy or possessiveness, but from a deep-seated need to protect her daughter from any more lies. Eventually, Andrew confessed. He told her about the courthouse, about the rushed vows, about Cynthia's manipulation, but he didn't tell the whole truth. He left out how willingly he'd followed Cynthia to that courthouse, how willingly he had signed that paper. He painted himself as confused, as swept up, as pressured. Jessica saw through it. You weren't confused, she said bitterly. You were selfish. You saw a shiny new life, and you ran toward it. You left me bleeding and scared so you could chase a fantasy. Andrew's shoulders sagged under the weight of her words. You're right. But I want to fix it. You can't fix this, Andrew, she replied coldly. You can't unmake that choice. Then came Cynthia's retaliation. When Andrew began mentioning annulment, Cynthia refused. She threatened legal action. She claimed she was pregnant. She demanded financial support. And she made one thing clear: she would not be erased. Andrew was now legally married to Cynthia and trapped. Jessica, stuck in legal limbo, couldn't even call herself a divorced woman. Technically, she was still married to a man who now belonged, at least on paper, to someone else. The weight of it all became unbearable. Maria urged Jessica to lawyer up. Abigail offered to help with court filings. Even Monique, once silent, told Jessica, "You deserve peace no matter what it takes." And amid all this, Amelia began to smile for the first time. Jessica wept that day, not because of joy, but because she finally realized how much she'd been holding in. Her daughter was growing. Time was moving. And Jessica, she had a choice to make. She could stay tangled in Andrew's chaos, or she could begin building a life where she was no longer collateral damage, but the foundation of something new. A few months later, Jessica resumed a semblance of normalcy for Amelia's sake. She moved out of her in-laws' home and into a small apartment near her old preschool. With the help of her sister-in-law, Abigail, she began piecing together a new life. She returned to part-time, teaching her colleagues, offering a supportive embrace during her darkest hours. Everyone in Glendale had heard the gossip Andrew Smith had married his mistress while his wife was giving birth. The story circulated in hushed tones at church gatherings, local cafes ironically, including Glendale grounds, and at the preschool playground. Andrew found himself at odds with Cynthia more frequently than he could have anticipated. Their marriage, born of secrecy and impulsivity, lacked a foundation of trust or genuine companionship. Cynthia wanted Andrew's undivided attention, but his guilt pulled him toward Amelia. He tried to be present in Amelia's life, scheduling visits, under the watchful eye of Jessica's disapproving family. Every time he held his daughter, an ache stabbed his heart, reminding him of the home and love he had forsaken. This was not the fresh start he'd imagined. It was a tangled web of regret and half-truths. As Jessica adjusted to single motherhood, she found unexpected solace in therapy sessions offered through her school's counseling program. Talking to a professional helped her process her heartbreak, anger, and lingering doubts. She admitted she still loved Andrew, or at least the man he used to be, but she couldn't reconcile that memory with the person he'd become. Could she ever forgive him? That question loomed without a clear answer. One day, Jessica received an unexpected visitor at her apartment, Marcus Andrews' older brother. Known for his no-nonsense demeanor, Marcus delivered a blunt assessment. He believed Andrew had fallen under Cynthia's manipulative spell. Yet he also observed that Andrew was an adult who had knowingly walked into that relationship. Marcus wanted Jessica to be informed about the legal complexities. He offered to help her find a lawyer to clarify custody arrangements and child support. Andrew, he said, could not dodge his parental responsibilities, even if he was entangled in another marriage. Jessica appreciated the gesture, though it pained her that everything now had to be formalized in legal documents. Through all this, Amelia's presence was the one shining light. The baby giggled, learned to roll over, grabbed at Jessica's fingers and cooed with a pure love that transcended adult betrayals. Jessica clung to that innocence, determined to protect her daughter from the storm Andrew had unleashed. As the first year of Amelia's life unfolded, Andrew's internal conflict intensified. He had tried to negotiate an annulment with Cynthia, but she stonewalled him, demanding a large financial settlement. Cynthia had grown more possessive, possibly realizing that the rush of victory from winning Andrew was fleeting if he remained emotionally distant. Desperate, Andrew sought the counsel of a divorce attorney, Joseph Brandt, who laid out the grim possibilities. Since Andrew and Cynthia had legally married, dissolving the union would be costly and complicated. Given that Cynthia was not simply walking away, the matter could drag on for years if contested. Andrew's mind spun at the prospect. Glendale grounds, though profitable, might not withstand a legal war. And then there was Jessica and Amelia. He wanted to be there for them, to provide a comfortable life for his daughter. But each passing day felt like the walls were closing in. Meanwhile, Jessica grew stronger in her independence. She threw herself into teaching with Amelia as her primary motivation. The more she focused on her own life, the clearer it became that Andrew's choices were out of her control. Though she felt pangs of love and sorrow, she knew a future with him now came with heavy baggage named Cynthia. Cynthia, unrelenting, tried to mold Andrew into a trophy husband. She insisted he attend galas, marketing seminars, and social events that she organized. She wanted to showcase her success. Look, I have the most sought-after entrepreneur in Glendale by my side, but Andrew's heart wasn't in it. He would plaster on a polite smile for photographs, while silently yearning to be reading bedtime stories to Amelia or checking on Jessica's well-being. One evening, Andrew decided to slip away from a networking event to drive by Jessica's apartment. As he parked outside, he saw the soft glow of lamplight through the window. Inside, Jessica was cradling Amelia, singing a lullaby. Andrew felt an almost physical pain, an overwhelming wave of regret and sorrow. He realized that in chasing a reckless fantasy, he had lost the chance to be a father to his daughter in all those little day-to-day ways that truly mattered. That night, Andrew didn't step out of his car. He just watched quietly, tears threatening to spill. He realized that no matter what legal or financial battles lay ahead, he would need to do something drastic to rectify or at least mitigate the damage he had done. The question was, how much was he willing to sacrifice to make things right? It began with a phone call. Jessica had just returned from the grocery store, balancing a squirming Amelia on one hip and a bag of produce on the other, when her phone rang. The caller ID was unfamiliar, Elena Collins, it read. Jessica hesitated for a beat before answering. Ms. Perez, the voice on the other end, was smooth, almost apologetic. I'm Elena Collins from the Glendale Register. I'm working on a feature story regarding Andrew Smith, the founder of Glendale Grounds. We've received several anonymous tips that his personal life may have intersected with his business decisions. Would you be open to an interview? Jessica froze. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the first time she'd felt the heat of whispers following her at the preschool or sensed stares at the park playground. But this was different. This was the press. This was exposure. I'm sorry, I'm not interested, she said, her voice clipped but polite. Please don't call me again. Jessica hung up and stared at the floor, her heart pounding. Her daughter clung to her, sensing her mother's tension. She kissed Amelia's forehead and whispered, "It's okay, baby. We're okay." But they weren't. The next day, the headline exploded across the internet. Cafe King's secret vows. A tale of betrayal and big business. Jessica's photo, taken from her old Facebook profile, was plastered beside Andrew's and Cynthia's. The article was filled with speculation, anonymous sources, and just enough truth to make it impossible to ignore. It detailed Andrew's courthouse wedding, on the day Jessica gave birth, the existence of Cynthia in Glendale Grounds operations, and even claimed that Cynthia was now pregnant with Andrew's second child. Jessica sat at her kitchen table, the newspaper trembling in her hands. Her coffee had gone cold. Her heart felt as if it had been ripped from her chest and laid bare for the entire town to dissect. The shame, the humiliation, it all came crashing down. At the preschool, parents gave her sympathetic looks, cloaked in curiosity. At the grocery store, strangers whispered behind aisle displays. Jessica did her best to hold her head high, but inside she was unraveling. She felt stripped of her privacy dignity and the little stability she had built over the last year. Later that week, Maria, her outspoken cousin, burst into Jessica's apartment. "You have to respond," Maria said, throwing the newspaper on the counter. "You can't let her control the narrative. You can't let people think you were the problem." "I don't care what they think," Jessica whispered, staring blankly at the window. "I care about Amelia." Maria's voice softened. "And Amelia will grow up Googling her parents one day. Do you want her to find this and think you were silent because you had something to be ashamed of?" Jessica blinked back tears. "I was in labor. He was marrying someone else. What else is there to say?" Meanwhile, Andrew was spiraling. Glendale Grounds had started to suffer. Once a local darling of artisanal charm and community pride, the cafes were now haunted by the scandal. Long-time customers boycotted the stores. Business partners pulled out of potential collaborations. His inbox was flooded with emails, some cruel, some disappointed, a few supportive but all overwhelming. In private, Andrew seethed, not at Jessica, not even at the media. He seethed at himself for letting it get this far, for trusting Cynthia, for believing that a woman who craved power could ever be satisfied with love. He confronted Cynthia one night, demanding to know if the pregnancy rumors were true. "Are you pregnant or not?" He barked. Cynthia smiled lazily, swirling her wine in a glass. "That's none of your business, darling, unless you plan to take responsibility. Don't play games." She leaned in her voice like poison-laced silk. "You made me a promise, Andrew. You left your wife. You married me. And now you're embarrassed because people know the truth, poor Andrew. The world's seeing who you really are." He stormed out. Desperate to reclaim some control, Andrew messaged Jessica. "Can I come by just to talk, after Amelia's asleep? I need to explain." Jessica stared at the message for a long time before replying, "1 hour. Don't be late." That evening, the atmosphere in her apartment was charged and tense. Amelia was asleep in her crib. The quiet hum of the baby monitor filled the silence between them. Andrew looked worn older, paler, beaten down by headlines and regret. He took off his coat and stood awkwardly near the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry," he began. Jessica folded her arms. "You've said that before." "I know, but this time I mean it without expecting anything in return. I want to tell the truth." He explained everything: the legal mess, Cynthia's manipulation, the pregnancy lie, he still hadn't seen any proof, and his failing business. "I'm trying to get out. I'm trying to fight for custody, for annulment, for everything, but Cynthia's playing a dangerous game." Jessica watched him closely. "And you're not," his shoulders slumped. "I was. But I'm not anymore, I swear. I don't want Cynthia. I don't want that life. I just want to be a father to Amelia. I want to help raise her, to give her stability, and maybe one day, to deserve a second chance." Jessica said nothing at first. Then, in a low voice, "You missed your daughter's birth, Andrew. You didn't just break a vow, you broke a moment. And that's something you can never get back, I know," he whispered, "and I live with it every single day." He wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his jacket. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to prove that I can be more than what I was." Jessica stared at him for a long moment. For her sake, she said, "You'd better be." That night, when Andrew left, Jessica didn't feel resolved or healed. But she did feel a shift, something real, however small. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the beginning of something new: accountability. And for once, Andrew didn't run from it. The following weeks turned into a seesaw of emotions. Jessica allowed Andrew scheduled visits with Amelia, making him promise not to bring Cynthia. Andrew complied, driving over after work to spend a couple of hours with his daughter, reading picture books or simply watching her play. Amelia, unburdened by adult conflicts, giggled and squealed, reaching out her tiny arms for her father. Each visit filled Andrew with a bittersweet mixture of joy and remorse. Meanwhile, Cynthia launched her own campaign. She began appearing unannounced at Glendale grounds, making public scenes whenever Andrew tried to avoid her. On one occasion, she threw a coffee mug against the wall, shattering it, and screamed about Andrew's betrayal. Staff members exchanged looks of alarm. Andrew was forced to ask Cynthia to leave, but she threatened a lawsuit for emotional distress. It was the kind of drama that neither Andrew nor his employees could contain. Word spread further, tarnishing the cafe's reputation. In a desperate attempt at damage control, Andrew considered selling Glendale grounds entirely, or at least transferring ownership to remove himself from the public eye. Yet something in him resisted, letting go of the dream he had poured so much effort into. That dream, after all, had once been shared by Jessica. He wasn't ready to abandon it, not unless there was no other choice. Simultaneously, Jessica faced her own set of dilemmas. She had found a new sense of self after Andrew's betrayal, an independence that, while painful, was also empowering. The question lingered, did she want Andrew back in her life, beyond his role as Amelia's father? Could she love him again? Did she even want to friends? And family weighed in most urging caution. Jessica's cousin Maria told her not to risk her heart again. Abigail, torn by loyalty to both her brother and Jessica, simply said she would support any decision Jessica made. Despite the well-intentioned counsel, Jessica knew the choice was ultimately hers alone. One late evening, after putting Amelia to bed, Jessica scrolled through old photos on her phone, pictures of her and Andrew during their college days, smiling in front of Glendale grounds, first storefront arms wrapped around each other. Tears stung her eyes. It was amazing how quickly a life could change, how swiftly a dream could become a nightmare. Yet a flicker of hope refused to extinguish a persistent memory of the Andrew she used to know thoughtful, determined loving. If that Andrew still existed somewhere beneath the wreckage, perhaps redemption was possible, but only if he was willing to fight for it. Andrew finally took a decisive step. He served Cynthia with divorce papers. The day he handed them to her in the Glendale grounds office, she burst into a violent rage, knocking over a display of coffee bags and hurling a stream of curses his way. Cynthia vowed to destroy Andrew's reputation, to drag him through the courts, and to take every penny he had. Andrew steeled himself, knowing it could get ugly, but he also felt a sense of relief for having chosen a path, no matter how perilous. Cynthia's next move was to go public. She scheduled an interview with Elena Collins, the same journalist from the Glendale Register, to tell her side of the story. In a lengthy exposé, Cynthia painted Andrew as a manipulative cheater who promised her marriage and then threw her aside. She claimed to be pregnant, though she provided no medical proof. She also cast aspersions on Jessica, insinuating that Jessica had driven Andrew into Cynthia's arms by being too controlling and needy. The article spread like wildfire, spurring heated debates in social media groups and local forums. Glendale grounds faced more boycotts, and Andrew's personal phone was inundated with hateful messages. Despite the chaos, Jessica noticed something different about Andrew. He no longer wavered. He attended every court hearing, every mediation, prepared to stand up for himself. He publicly declared Cynthia's allegations false, challenging her to present evidence of her supposed pregnancy. Moreover, he consistently showed up for Amelia, never missing a scheduled visit. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. Andrew was finally taking responsibility for his actions, rather than hiding. At one court hearing, Cynthia arrived with a lawyer, but still no proof of pregnancy. The judge grew impatient, demanding to see medical records. Cynthia tried to stall, claiming she needed more time. Andrew's lawyer seized the opportunity to highlight her lack of credibility. Outside the courtroom, Andrew and Jessica found themselves briefly alone. Andrew thanked Jessica for not attacking him in the press. Jessica responded that she wanted Amelia to grow up respecting both parents if possible. "You made the choices that led us here," she said, eyes brimming with both sadness and a hint of compassion. "But I don't want this to end in endless hatred. It's bad for Amelia." That conversation lingered in Andrew's mind. For the first time since the fiasco began, he felt a tiny measure of hope, not necessarily that Jessica would take him back, but that perhaps they could move forward in a healthier way. Even as Cynthia's fury promised more storms ahead, Andrew stood firm. He realized he might be too late to fix the damage he had done, but for Amelia's sake, and perhaps for Jessica's, he wanted to try. A few more months rolled by, bringing both relief and new challenges. The court compelled Cynthia to submit to a medical examination. The results proved she was not pregnant, confirming Andrew's suspicion that the pregnancy was a fabrication to maintain control. Incensed by being caught in her lie, Cynthia ramped up her intimidation tactics. She threatened to reveal intimate details about her and Andrew's affair, claiming she had photos and messages that would mortify him. Andrew's lawyer countered with a cease and desist letter, warning Cynthia that releasing any private content without consent could open her to legal consequences. The tension simmered, but for the moment, Cynthia's threats remained just that, threats. Meanwhile, Jessica witnessed Andrew's transformation more clearly. He had stepped back from the daily operations of Glendale grounds, delegating responsibilities to a trusted management team so he could focus on his legal battles and personal life. During his visits with Amelia, he was attentive patient and genuinely engaged. He even attended a few of Jessica's therapy sessions to work on co-parenting strategies. Though far from perfect, he was making real efforts to repair what he could. Yet the question still lingered. Could they reconcile romantically? Jessica wrestled with that uncertainty. In therapy, she admitted that while she saw positive changes, the betrayal ran deep. She worried about setting a dangerous precedent, that she might inadvertently teach Amelia that it was okay to accept infidelity or abandonment. On the other hand, she recognized that people could change if they truly confronted their wrongdoing. She didn't want to bury her own capacity for forgiveness. Andrew, for his part, didn't push. He asked Jessica if they could go on a walk together with Amelia in her stroller, just to talk. Jessica agreed, and they met on a sunny afternoon at Verdugo Park. They strolled beneath leafy trees, making small talk at first about Amelia's feeding habits, her new obsession with a plush teddy bear. Gradually, the conversation turned more serious. Andrew spoke candidly about his regret, his foolishness in thinking Cynthia was the thrill he needed. He confessed that the life he truly wanted was the one he'd thrown away, but he accepted that getting it back might never happen. He just hoped Jessica would see that he was genuinely remorseful. They ended the walk by a small pond where ducks gathered. Amelia squealed at the sight of them reaching out her chubby arms. Jessica looked at Andrew, who held Amelia's tiny hand, and for a fleeting moment, the scene felt familiar, like an echo of the family they were supposed to be. Jessica felt a twinge of longing. Maybe they could chart a new path. But neither of them spoke that thought aloud, uncertain of how to proceed without reopening old wounds. 3 years had passed since that fateful day Jessica went into labor. 3 years since Andrew made the catastrophic decision to marry his mistress while his pregnant wife lay in a hospital bed. The legal processes dragged on, but at last, a weary judge granted Andrew a divorce from Cynthia, citing fraud as the primary cause. Cynthia vanished from Glendale shortly after leaving behind a trail of rumors and unpaid debts. Glendale grounds, weathering an initial slump, rebounded under a new marketing campaign, and a sympathetic public who found Andrew's renewed humility more palatable than his previous brash ambition. Amelia was now a rambunctious toddler, her curly hair framing a mischievous smile. She bounded around Jessica's small apartment, filling the rooms with laughter. Andrew visited often, sharing meals and reading bedtime stories. He never stayed overnight, respecting Jessica's emotional boundaries, but he was there. And it made all the difference to Amelia, whose face lit up whenever he walked through the door. Andrew and Jessica had been slowly, cautiously inching toward reconciliation. They enrolled in a co-parenting class, which transitioned into a couples counseling program once Jessica felt stable enough to consider rebuilding their relationship. Their counselor, Dr. Samantha Lee, guided them through trust exercises and long, sometimes painful dialogues. Andrew owned his mistakes with sincerity that Jessica had never seen before. Jessica spoke her truth, explaining the deep wounds left by his betrayal. She set firm boundaries about honesty and accountability. Little by little, the walls cracked. On Amelia's 3rd birthday, they threw a small party in Jessica's new rental house, a modest but cozy place with a backyard. Family and close friends gathered, including Andrew's parents, Jessica's cousins, and a handful of their old college friends. Balloons dotted the fence line, and a homemade chocolate cake sat on the picnic table. Jessica stood by the grill flipping hamburgers, while Andrew chased Amelia around the yard, both shrieking with laughter. In a quiet moment, Jessica's cousin Maria approached, gave her a hug, and whispered, "I've never seen you smile like this since before everything happened. You look happy." Jessica realized she was happy at least in that fleeting moment. After the guests left, and the yard was littered with wrapping paper, Andrew helped Jessica put Amelia to bed. They read her a new storybook about a family of bears who lose their way and find each other again. Amelia nodded off her little fist wrapped around Andrew's finger. Jessica and Andrew stood there, watching their daughter sleep, the moonlight casting a soft glow on Amelia's rosy cheeks. Andrew turned to Jessica, tears brimming in his eyes. "I'm so sorry," he said, voice trembling. "For everything." In that quiet moment, Jessica placed her hand gently on his cheek. She didn't say the words, "I forgive you," because forgiveness was an ongoing journey. But the gesture was enough to let Andrew know that at last there was a path forward. A path that involved acknowledging the past while daring to hope for a better future together. Though 3 years had already passed since the day Andrew married his mistress, the full weight of his regret would linger well beyond that timeline. Each milestone, Amelia's first words, her first steps, her first day of preschool, reminded him of the moments he nearly forfeited. He often lay awake at night, tormented by vivid memories of Jessica in that hospital bed, crying out for him, while he was somewhere else, exchanging vows that meant nothing but heartbreak. However, life, in its strange mercy, granted him a second chance. Andrew used it to become the father and partner he should have been all along. He poured his energy not just into Glendale grounds, but also into rebuilding the trust he had squandered with Jessica. Slowly, they found their way back to affection. It wasn't like the youthful honeymoon phase they once shared. It was more measured, scarred by pain, but underpinned by a deeper, steadier love forged through hard-earned lessons. Even so, regret was Andrew's daily companion. Some days, it was a dull ache, a reminder of his frailty. On other days, it flared painfully, especially whenever he saw Jessica quietly wipe away tears, triggered by a stray thought of that dark time. But in facing that regret, head-on, in never forgetting it, Andrew found a compass that guided him to be better. Because true redemption, he learned, demands that you remember why you needed it in the first place. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of betrayal, regret, and the fragile hope for redemption. Andrew's story serves as a stark reminder that the choices we make, especially in moments of weakness, can carry consequences that ripple through many lives. Yet it also shows that with honesty, determination, and a willingness to face the past, it's sometimes possible to rebuild what was broken. Jessica's story proves that strength and compassion can coexist, and that setting boundaries doesn't mean shutting the door to healing. If you found value in this story, please give this video a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue to explore real-life dramas and lessons that resonate with the human experience. Together, we can learn from these stories and find hope in the hardest of circumstances. Total approximate word count 6,500 words.